Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the 6 Star Business Podcast. It's me, your host, Aveline Clark. I am so grateful to still be here. Do you know it's been a year since Pete Daly-Dixon and I started the 6 Star Business Podcast? And when we did, we certainly didn't have any idea of how long it would go for, how many episodes we'd do. Obviously, Pete left during the process, and here I still am, and it's been a year. And I must say I'm really grateful. It's been a wild journey, a wild ride, and it feels very fitting that a year after we first launched our first episode, that we've got a guest on who's really marked the beginning of a new era in the podcast. His name is Wayne Larkin, and after this episode, I sat back and spoke with my co-host, and what came out of this was a realization that we're not here just to create 6-star businesses. No, we are here to create 6-star leaders. And every guest who's been on the podcast is a leader in some way. We are all here, we're all driven and called to do something more with our lives. It's why we have businesses. The people that come on this podcast are largely purpose-driven. They want to create more impact and combine that with purpose and love. And this is what we've seen over and over, but it doesn't just come with some strategies or some tactics or areas to focus on. It comes with starting with the self. And that's become more evident in the conversations that we've had. And when Wayne came and talked with us, it was just so clear to me about what my role is as a steward of this podcast. And I'm just really, really happy and grateful that Wayne joined us on the eve of the 1-year anniversary. So now it starts the new era of 6-star business, in that we are here to help foster 6-star leaders and unpack what that means. It doesn't mean that our conversations will be too much different. However, we will have a focus on what it means to be a 6-star leader, as well as creating 6-star businesses. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and I encourage you to continue asking yourselves the questions that we ask our guests and see how you can put these things into practice. What makes a leader to you? Feel free to let me know by sending an email through, and if you feel that you have a 6-star leadership story that you would like to share with the world on this podcast, please get in touch. I want to showcase more people who have more stories and bring out stories of leadership, because true leadership comes through telling stories. So my co-host on the episode today is the wonderful Endra Hoffman, and he got as much out of this as I did. It is a wonderful conversation. Wayne Larkin has a lifetime of experiences beyond what most people have had, in that his journey is just incredible. You hear of some people and you go, how on earth did they pack all of that into, 20, 30, 40 years? Well, this is one of those people, and it's an absolute pleasure to have Wayne on the podcast, and I hope you really enjoy it. Let's do this. Let's take off on the 6-Star Business Podcast rocket ship. Hello, Wayne. Hello, Endra, my co-host. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's so good to see you both today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you for joining me.
How are you, Endra?
See you guys.
Good to have you, Endra, as my co-host today. Always enjoy having you along. And on this episode, we've got one guest. So that means, Wayne, you get the spotlight today. And I'm super excited about this. So as we always like to do at the start, we want to get to know you, and our audience want to know who you are. So could you share with us a little bit about yourself? So who are you? Where are you located in the world? Who do you serve? And what do you like to do when you're not serving people?
Sure. So if we start with the location, I'm located 80 kilometres south of Sydney in a place called Wollongong. And if I just give a quick background on some of my history, that might help to position it.
Lovely.
So I was originally trained in graphic design and advertising. Worked in the record industry back in the late 70s. A good time to be in that space. And worked there for a year and left there as assistant national art director, and then worked for Dordane Bernbach, which is one of the big international advertising agencies on the creative team. And then worked for different agencies, and then started my own advertising agency, accredited agency. And we used to look after a lot of really big industrial accounts like BHP and CRAs, mining, chemical and coke. Did work agency for Westfield, New South Wales Tourism, a lot of major accounts. And then also then started a group called Visual Design Group. And so worked across most sectors and from large to small companies. And what I started to find is there's a commonality between them in the sense of how they operate and also their communication strategies. And so that's sort of a quick summary. And the areas I sort of work in is thought leadership, innovation, marketing, change management, advertising, communications, and social media. Also worked on things like I headed up a project for cross-disaster management for Malaysia's National Security Division. So, and after 3 years, we won the tender for that. And that was working with one of the leading defence contractors in the United States and took US Congress approval. Also was a director of an IT company that we sold internationally software. There was two of us directors of it, and that was for 10 years. And also head up as manager and also event director of the Long Ride Home, which Sir Peter Cosgrove, who was head of defence and former Governor General, as the patron for. And so I've had a fairly, I've been on boards of charities and also been involved in sports, represented Australia many times. So basically was in 1974 was Australian champion for giant slalom and paraski, represented Australia and Austria in 1979, and also style and accuracy in skydiving, and also captained the Australian 8-way team in 1985 in Yugoslavia.
What was that team you captained? Sorry,
It's skydiving, so you have 8 people on a team, and you've got to actually make formations over about 45 seconds, and do 10 jumps, and then you get marked on the number of formations you actually do in a given time. And I used to do a lot of demonstration jumping. I did 8 grand finals for rugby league, Royalista shows, jumps for Coca-Cola, 2SM parachute team. And so I've been involved in lots of sports as well, different sports through the years. So it gives me different perspectives on business and team building.
quite literally.
Yes.
So were you doing? Sorry, I know you're giving us background and sort of talking about who you serve and that, but I've got a lot of questions, and Andrew, you might have as well. Given that you were in sport at such an elite level, was this also at the time you were working in the creative space?
Yeah, both at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was on the side.
Which one was on the side, the sport or the creative?
Yeah.
Side?
Well, the creative sort of was 5 days a week, and the sport was 2 days a week.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
But it gives you really good insights that what happens is that when you work across a lot of different sectors, whether it's, I work for universities and education systems, and, I worked on Reform of Australian Defence, which is $5.5 billion reform project. After they had some problems with that, and I also worked for the Federal Innovation Department on policy as a contractor, as there as well, to look at solving certain problems and developed a system called STAR teams, how to really effectively create high quality rapid decision making, which I was then asked to go back and lecture to Defence on at one of their national seminars where they have the top brass there. Like we had admirals from the UK. You have also top scientists there and intelligence agencies from Defence and Asia and different intelligence groups. And I was the last guest speaker, and my job was to basically present that the command and control hierarchical systems weren't necessarily that effective in making good decision making, and that models in relationship to using small teams or working on the same situation was a lot more effective. So when we ran a just under 2 hour program on it, and they understand implemented 2 ideas up into Defence, and normally that would take around 2 years. So it's around about 1,000 times more effective in that case. But they were also very well trained, very good at what they did, as in strategy and picking up new techniques.
This is impressive, Dane. These stories that you're sharing with us. What was the biggest breakthrough with this last project that you have seen, or the blind spot that you found that had to be resolved?
Yeah, I guess, that's a good question and a big one. I guess one of the things too is that I look at situation analysis pretty well, which most people don't do. So you have to have neutrality with that. So most people have a set way and methodology of looking at things. And one of the problems is if you have a way of doing something, you become blind to other possibilities, right? So if you can look at a situation with neutrality, and it does take training, and if you know how to do it properly and spend enough time on it, the answer comes out. So instead of looking for the answer, you're really studying that. And so one of the things that's quite clear is that, there's a great flaw in our education system. It started in the industrial age, but basically got developed by the Prussians in 1806 after Napoleon beat them at war. And so they decided they'd never lose a war again, and that they would get kids from the age of 6 to 16, and they would basically program them to say yes to what needed to be done. And that's the same system we have today. And so one of the things is that, most people aren't trained to think laterally. So that's a fundamental problem with problem solving. And if you look at Dr. Land, who was brought in to do a program for NASA, I'm selecting creative geniuses who are involved in engineering, because most people basically build on the knowledge they have. But when you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't have precedent, what you need is really creative, innovative thinkers that can think outside the box. And so you've developed a test that worked extremely well. So then they tried it out on children at school. And what they found, I think it was from the ages of 3 to 6, they found that children aged 5 had the highest creative genius level at 98%. And as school went on, they lost that creativity capability. And so adults only have 2% creative genius capability. And then that's not counting that people being trained to be creative, right? So you can have a talent for something, but not having been trained in that process. So a very small number. And so most people work under a methodology and command and control system. And as sort of it's spoken about, people sort of live a lot in their consciousness and methodology rather than their subconscious. So in Australia, for example, the average IQ, which is a bad measure, but it's a guide. Consciousness, we have about 98 to 99% IQ level. Subconscious are around 300. So if you can get people to work in subconscious, you're talking about an IQ of around about 400, and a genius IQ is considered 130. And then if you can put people together and get them to network properly in that sort of level, you can come up with ideas really rapidly. So fundamentally, the governance system that we have for not only running politics, governments, and businesses might have appeared to work in the industrial age, where people were treated like machines, but it no longer serves us. And so that's where we're in trouble. So people want change, but the thing is the governance and the way we do things is really critical. That has to change.
You've raised so many interesting, relevant, and fascinating points already. The question I have for you is, where does that change start?
Yeah, that's pretty easily answered. It has to basically start with the people. And so there are three key elements to hiring a company. A lot of people think that once we start to grow a business, we can then get the right people together. But what's really important is the first 10 people that you hire are critical to actually set the culture. It's like a fractal science, right? If you've got bad cells, then they don't multiply properly. And so selecting the right people and then putting them in the right environment, and getting them to ask the right questions in teams is critical. And our current hierarchical structures aren't set up like that at all. So you have to get the right people in. Trying to change a total organization to do that is a good way to fail. McKinsey talks around about a 70% failure rate in change management. I put that failure rate at 95% plus in my experience, because most organizations won't tell you they failed. They bury it and hide it. And so if it doesn't meet criteria or partly doesn't meet it, they'll sort of bury it off. And so yeah, they're the main points. The other one too is vision, purpose, and values. If you ask most people in an organization what the company's vision is, they don't know. And if you ask them what their purpose is, they don't know. And if you ask them what the values are, they don't know. So if we transfer that to defense, for an example, to say that the military or soldiers didn't know why they were going somewhere and what they were meant to do and what their values was, it'd be an absolute disaster. And everyone knows their mission, right? They know what they're meant to do and how they're meant to do it and why they're doing it in the bigger picture, and it gives them a degree of autonomy where they can operate off their own bat because they know what the vision is, they know what their purpose is, and they know what the values are in which they're meant to be operating in. And so most organisations don't have that at all. So our current system is not slightly flawed, it's broken badly, and it really needs to be rebuilt because it can't keep up with the change that's happening at the moment. So a lot of people are looking at coming up with incremental change. If you study through history, all great changes happen by geniuses, and that's how you get sort of dynamic quantum leaps, and that's the sort of thing you want. But when you study it, you find that nearly all those geniuses were bagged out, killed, really badly treated. Pasteur was booed off stage. The gentleman who said you need to wash your hands before giving birth to doctors was put in a mental asylum and beaten to death. The Wright brothers, even 50 years after they were flying planes, still had academics writing papers on why planes couldn't fly. So you have that sort of fundamental problem of all truth goes through three phases. First, it's heavily denied, then it's heavily resisted, and then found self-evident. The problem with finding it self-evident is that people don't learn the lessons, that they can't recognize genius or the things that we need to do. And Planck said basically generations have to die out before new ideas can be accepted. So they're fundamental flaws. And so the biggest thing is a change in thinking of how people think. They really need to let go of what they believe to be true. Because we know a lot about what works now, but organisations and people are very resistant because they have a invested interest in their knowledge and where they've got to, and they're protecting that. So it becomes an autoimmune system for an organisation or a group that they'll kill anything that basically appears to be putting them under a threat by change, and that they may, fear that.
I love the reference to nature because everything reflects what happens in nature. And your description then of people's thinking and being an autoimmune disease, really, in an organisation is just so spot on. Would you say that is the norm, or is it more commonplace? Like, what percentage of organisations, maybe medium and above sized, would experience what you're saying?
All of them.
Okay.
I think that's fairly easy, and the point to nature is really important. So the model I've developed, of course, is biomimicry to a large degree as well, and also practical. And so if people aren't students of nature, they basically set the seeds of their own destruction. The idea that we have an economics that somehow has no correlation directly to nature is insanity. If we just do a thought experiment, say if I take the planet away, where's our economy, right? Well, we wouldn't even survive. But if we're only equal 0.001% of biomass on the planet, and yet we're doing massive destruction, and if we took humans off the planet, it would just spring back to life, right? And so fundamentally, when people think about economics, economists know, the price of everything, the value of nothing. And so one of the things is that we don't tend to place a value on nature unless we want to use it for something. And but fundamentally, people basically have a very low percentage rate in the economy scheme. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's only something like about 3% input, because nature provides everything else. Currently, at the moment, we're using 1.8 planets, which is quite insane. It just can't regenerate fast enough. And so this sort of incremental thinking, or also a lot of people have ideas about a global concept, whereas if we can get the whole globe to change, and we can get all these countries from around the world to sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya, that all of a sudden that'll make the place sustainable, and that's just absolutely ridiculous. It's the same as thinking that you can go to corporations and just get them all to change overnight. It's just not going to happen. So how those things work much better, the model I have is that you identify certain people within an organisation, small group, look at low-hanging fruit, look at a really good pain point that can be solved fairly quickly, and then you get people also from outside the organisation, and they become sort of like a creative hit team. And then what they do is they solve these problems that, while they're connected to the organisation, they have autonomy, and no one necessarily is aware that they're existing or running at the time. And their success rates actually start to create a gravity where more and more people want to be involved in that team because of its success rates and what's it doing. And it's low risk for the CEO, and he can see the benefits. So at no time is he, put in danger. I'll give you an example with under Sterling in the Second World War with the British SAS. And I was lucky enough to hear on video the originals talking about this. They were taking out up to over 64 enemy aircraft in a night, in one day. And in 1 year, they took more enemy aircraft out than the whole of the British Air Force. Now, there's a small group, teams were more destructive. So when you look at return on investment, that's a good case. And there's tons of those. I mean, Steve Jobs, when he developed the new operating system, he had 600 engineers working for 2 years to create OS. Microsoft had 10,000 engineers working for 5 years to create Vista, and then had to shut it down because it failed. And Steve basically, IBM basically was spending 100 times more on R&D than what Steve Jobs was doing. But the point behind that is that 1,000 mediocre people don't equal one genius. So Steve didn't spend so much on R&D, where you hear people say R&D is expensive, it's got a big failure rate. That's just totally untrue. It's all to do with the people. He spent it on the people, and if you get the right people in the room, right, they just create things. whether it's Walt Disney or Elon Musk or whoever it may be, they just create things. So it all starts with getting the right people together.
Wayne, my question is it fair to say then our future of business, our future of this planet is about really bringing out that genius that you mentioned before? That really hit me in the heart, that number when you said, I think you mentioned something, children at a certain age lose 98% of their genius. I mean, I have children. I know I
Correct.
have had children, and I just pulled them out of school this year. But teach us how, with all your experience that you have, what could we do, or what would be a solution to, if that's the case, that our genius could bring about change in business and maybe to nature on this planet, then, and how do we do that?
Yeah. Actually, it's not as difficult as what you think it is. And your question's broken into a few areas. One of the areas I'll deal with is that children at a young age. Now, what happens with propaganda and brainwashing is that very quickly people don't even realize they're brainwashed anymore, right? This is the way it is. So you've got teachers that aren't aware they're doing it. But I'll give you a classic example hidden in plain sight. A lot of kids realize that witches are fairly ugly, or portrayed as being fairly ugly looking, and they wear pointy hats and got warts on their face or whatever, and they have a cauldron and they mix all these bat wings up and frog's eyes. It's all really ugly stuff, right? And then they say magic words, right? And they put spells on people. Abracadabra, for example, comes from the Hebrew, meaning as I speak, I will create, right? And so a lot of people have got misconceptions about things. Now, kids sort of knowing that and they don't want to do that, the teacher will say to them at a young age, one of the most important things we need to teach you for you to be successful and to get going in the world is how to spell. We're going to teach you spelling, and it's literal. So they put the kids under a spell. And so what they do is they take their freedom away and, their power going forward. And so the teachers will ask a question, and it's the fastest person to put their hand up gets answered. It's the parrot syndrome, right? Who can tell back to me what I've told you to think and do, and they get rewarded. Anyone that does, let me think about that, wrong, don't think. And so that's one of the fundamental problems with it. The other issue too is that people feel a pain, and we know that civilizations, say, studied going back in time up to nearly 100 of them, their average life is about 336 years before they fail. And they all fundamentally fail for very similar reasons. It's self-suicide. So what happens, like, for example, at the moment, we all know that things aren't going as well as they should go. There isn't really a weather problem as much as there is a people problem, right, in the way we think and do things. And so the people at the top, though, have a vested interest in keeping the system the way it is, even though there's only a few of them, and even if it destroys itself, right? And that's what we've seen through history. People don't like to give their power up. The other problem is that when people get pain, and so you get revolutions and people feel pain, they go, okay, what we need to do is get rid of the problem. And they think moving a piece off the chessboard solves the problem. So they're not looking at the players and the pieces, because the pieces just get replaced, right? The people you can see aren't the people running things. And so they'll just put a new politician in or whatever it is, and it's a little bit like cows having a choice of 4 different doors, right? A green one, a blue one, a red one, but they all go to the abattoir. And so when people believe they have a choice, that's problematic. So no one really sits down and says, okay, we have the people, we have the technology. Let's start with a blue sky, white piece of paper. We have the capability. What should it look like? And a classic example of that is Walt Disney, for example, with his development of Disneyland. And one of my good friends and lecturers actually worked on the Disney program in 1954. He headed up creative team. And that was all about, what should the happiest place in the world look like? Now, when you consider that was open in, if I'm correct, 1955, Disney still have, I believe, out of the top 10 amusement parks in the world, 7 of them. And they've been basically making a profit ever since, and they're quite a massive company themselves. Now, why can't we do that with ourselves in nature and say, okay, what does that look like? Because we have the technology, how we can actually make nature thrive, because nature is part of our economy. And how can we live in nature so we have inside out living? And it's not about building a hippie commune or a really modern tech place. It's how you actually integrate those capabilities. And so what we have is, we know there's some fundamental principles that you have to have. One's water, and we know a lot about we know a fair bit about the science of water, but it's still one of the great mysteries. And how you actually purify water, store it, and highly energize it. The other one is food, and that's to do a lot with soil. So how do you actually create a soil with the bacterium in it, because that's what you're trying to feed. It's like the plankton in the sea that creates really rich. And so we know a lot about that and some of the key elements that go into that, because, trees talk to each other. I was trained by a Comanche Indian for a year when I was younger. So I understand a bit about the philosophy about how everything integrates. And then shelter. You've got homes on the east coast of Scotland that are 5,500 years old, and they're still as good as the day they were built. And then also waste management. So there's 15 elements altogether, but they're the base ones that you have to actually deal with. And we have the technology and know how to do all of those. You create villages that aren't bigger than 150, because you're probably aware of that over that Moore's law. After that, you're basically a Dunbar. I think it is Dunbar. So after that, people can't have the capability to know each other very well. And when I used to lecture, I used to talk about Sydney. You watch people at lunchtime walking past each other, destination orientated, not talking. They go into Hyde Park, they'd relax, they'd eat their lunch, they'd read a book, they'd look around. As soon as they get back into the flow, they go hard, because our buildings, for example, as my father taught me, in Europe were art pieces, and they were built for people, yeah? And so they were built to actually represent love of art and inspire people. So when you go to Europe, those old buildings, you feel that, whereas most buildings in Australia now are built on economics, and people feel that. So people aren't important, the buildings are important. And there's very little nature around. And we know that with non-locality, our bodies are very affected by the environment around us. That's why environments are very, very important for people to operate in. But I have a model called New Life Economics, which is a model on how you build villages and what they look like and how you make them thrive. And I've had friends of mine at PhDs look at it and felt that we only have to work 2 days a week to take in twice the amount of economy without really any damage to the environment, but actually making the environment thrive. And if you look at the world, the biggest killer in the world is heart attacks and cardiovascular disease. And what's interesting about that is that's all around the world, all different cultures. And people will look at the symptoms and say, well, it's stress, bad diet, lack of exercise, water prop. There's a whole lot of issues I'll come up with, but they're symptoms. The causality really goes back to a language you used to use but don't use anymore, and that is that they died of a broken heart. Because fundamentally, most people became unhappy, and then when they're unhappy, they create behaviours that cause them to go in poor health. And we focus a lot on our mind, and we know if our minds don't switch to left and right hemispheres really rapidly, like monks are very good at that. People who are involved in engineering and mathematics mainly use the left side of the brain rather than the creative side. And that switching, when they do EEGs, they find that the mind's really well balanced if someone meditates a lot and has a neutrality, and they're less likely to have mental disorders as well with what they do. Now, the heart basically has, from memory, 100 times more energy than the brain, and I think it's something like 5,000 times more electromagnetic energy. And so if you look in history, they always, one of the things is protect your heart with all your might, because that's where life comes from. So having your heart aligned with your belief systems and your subconscious is really critical, that for people to have sustainable well-being and create environments that are the same. And most people in societies aren't very happy. Did that answer the question okay?
Pretty much. I was just wondering, how would you be able to address that subconscious part of the mind, which I work with a lot of clients myself, but at a mass state of the world, and a lot of people have that, I would say, negative programming, or with sabotaging themselves from that happiness they would enjoy and deserve. Where should they start? Where would we start to make that change as a society, as business people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, when I was in China in 1981, I was lucky enough to be with some of the leaders in China, and we were paid to go over there to teach some of their elite people in the military. And we were there for 2 weeks, and they lived with us. But they were pretty, well, some of the brightest in the country, right? And when you got over 1 billion people, that's pretty bright. But one of the things they used to do to us all the time, like we'd be walking through a park, and then they'd put their hand out and stop us and say, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, we're going to the bus. You want us to go to the bus so we can go somewhere?" He said, "That's a problem with the West. You're always destination orientated." He said, "Without thinking about it, I want you to tell me where's the sun, and what direction the breeze is coming from, what speed it's traveling at, and there's a person off to your right with a top on. What color is it?" And we go, "Don't know." He said, "See, you're not living in the moment. You actually are not aware. So if you don't live in because you're probably well aware if the future doesn't exist and the past doesn't exist. The past is actually just a collections of memories that we believe that. And so if you're not living in the moment, or if we use the word a human being, as in being in the moment, you're just wasting life. And so we're always destination orientated. And as they told us, once you get to that destination, you've got another one and another one. So the problem with that is externalized. There's an old saying about three gods saying, the greatest secret in the universe, and how can we hide it? And one of them said, "We'll hide it on the highest mountain." And they said, no, people get to that. We'll hide it in the deepest sea. And then the others went, no, they'll get to that too. And the third one said, "I know, we'll put it within them and they won't think to look there." And so one of the most important things is it's really an inward journey, first of all. A Native American Indian I met, Apache, overseas, there's a thing called sleepwalkers. I'm not sure whether you're used to that term. But it's people that sort of walk around, they appear to be awake, but they're really not connected or with an inward journey. Like one of the things he said to me, just look at all the people in this theme park. He said, they're all here to be distracted from themselves. And they'll go home and watch TV and do these things and never make an inward journey to understand who they are. And so, the inward journey is the most important one of all. And you've really got to let go of everything you believe. And you've got to let go of time. And, there's different techniques like entrainment technologies that use binary sound float tanks, hypnotherapists, if you get really good ones. Because what you really want to do is you want to get there really quickly. And with some of the monks, when they were doing EEGs, and they were looking at the binary sounds in ears, and meditating with that, especially use hypnotherapy and a few other things, self-hypnotherapy. I'm sort of trained in that area as well, not to do it to people, but for myself, I did it. You can basically, the monks were saying that you could do in 1 month, if you did it hardcore for a month, what would take monks maybe 40 years to achieve. So there are shortcuts to that. But it's like anything, you've got to put the effort in to do it. And most people are scared to look in the mirror, and look within themselves. So if you don't change all your biases that you have within yourself, you won't be able to actually see properly. So most people think that what they see is real. We know that's really not true at all. We know that, say, for example, I understand if you took Everest as the waves that we know exist, our eyesight's equivalent to the size of a golf ball. And so, feel is also very, very important, how you feel, how your heart feels in your mind, and that they're basically in sync. So it's an internal journey. And then that changes how you perceive the world and how you can see it from different perspectives at the same time, without judgment. So one of the biggest problems with the English language is the judging language, or what they call an ism language. So you'll hear a lot of people say, an example, ice cream, and they'll go, there's chocolate or strawberry. And I go, I hate chocolate. Right? Now that's judgment. So a lot of science use E-prime language. It's an observation language. And you'd say, which one do you want? And I say, I prefer strawberry. I don't hate chocolate. I just prefer it. That's me, what I prefer. So you're not making judgments. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between judgments and observations. So in an observation, in a judgment, you might meet someone like John and say, what do you think of John? Oh, he's a cranky bastard. But observationally, someone might say, I don't know what it was necessarily, but when John was in that environment, something got him angry. So he's not being labelled with that's who he is. And so those elements, I don't come across a lot of people who can actually look at situations, with neutrality. I mean, we see it in defence. A lot of battles are lost in defence, not because a particular side couldn't win. It's because the general and the strategist saw the battlefield how they want to see it, rather than how it is.
Yeah, wow. Sorry, did you want to keep going there, Wayne?
No, it's just if I answered that question okay, and if there was a part of it I might have missed.
You've got the thumbs up from Endra. Yep, okay. I think you absolutely have. What's going on in my mind as you're speaking? I'm listening to this and I completely relate and understand. And I've heard this notion of the spell on children for a while, and I'm very conscious of my own children. And that's what I'm hearing you speak about, neutrality of thought and like you said, observational versus judgment thinking and the inward journey. I'm wondering, have you seen this applied in the business realm? As in, have you assisted? Is this part of what you do in a business, in a small team, to help them create that open, critical thinking? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Yeah, so the model I have called STAR teams is strategy, tactics, agility, and results-based teams. So one of the things I learned a lot as being a skydiving instructor is that when people think they're going to die, how you're able to train them to take commands, that's really at the pointy end of things, right? When someone thinks, oh my goodness, I'm going to die. How do you keep control of them in relationship to that they don't go too outward, that they keep inward and they keep thinking about what they're told to do on how they perform. So I learned a lot about that. And of course, one of the things I learned a lot about is that you can't use language that has any negative effect in it. So, for example, if I was to say to you, don't think about pink elephants, you'd think about pink elephants, right? So you don't tell people what they shouldn't do, you tell them what they should do. And I found that in team training as well. Changing the words become really, really important. It's like, let's say Aboriginals pointing the bone at someone, they might go away and they get isolated and don't get talked to. They might go away and die in 4 days, 2 weeks. The bone didn't actually kill them. What killed them was their belief system in what that bone would do. And words can be very similar. So one of the things that I look at doing is, if you think of it like an orchestra and you've got everyone plays an instrument and you put them all up there, so you're more of a facilitator and a conductor. And so when they all start playing, it's just a lot of noise. It's not in harmony. But after a while, they become an orchestra. And how to do that with people, instead of going through a really long process, you have to trick them. And so I have techniques of putting them under a lot of pressure within a very short period of time, but they don't know what comes next. So all they know is they've been given a command to do within a very short period of time. They can't really think about it. They just have to do it, because they know if they don't, they're not going to meet the timeline. And then once they get used to that, then I start to get them to work as a team around where they're coming up with ideas, and that's an internalized thing, and making it external. And then as they go round and round and people are adding positive things to it, so it's like genius, right? When you get a small seed, you really can't tell what the tree's going to be like. So you've got to let all ideas grow until they get to a certain point where it becomes obvious which one's going to work better. And so as it goes round and round, it usually takes about 1.5 days. And then they become harmonic, so they have a non-locality thing. And no longer are they thinking internally, they're seeing the problem in the center of their group. And there's not such a thing as stealing or any of that. They trade ideas with everyone else, and everyone else is presenting. And their focus is, what is the best outcome? And they're able to collectively know that. They just start to know, rather than people having their own inputs and judgments. I think this, I think that. It becomes quite obvious to the group. And I've had teams that have gone, nearly 2.5 days. They've got 2 hours to go before the final presentation of their idea, and they've scrapped it and said, we're starting all again. Now I've heard all this stuff. It's not going to work. As well as these other ones that go again, and you can't hang on too tight, and you've always got to see the upside of things, and you've got to have a lot of humor. So everyone has to wear casual clothes, really big name tags like kids, right? And no one really, and everyone's sitting around a table of 5. They cannot come from the same company, or they cannot come from the same, because it's transdisciplinary, right? So they cannot come from the same sector. So you have all these different perspectives. So no one can be, oh yeah, we know how this goes. Like you get in a boardroom, we know who's leading it, we know the idea. So you've got all these different, and they have to sort of work together. And then they have to wear really funny clothes too, like really funny hats or glasses or something, so that no one can take anyone seriously, right? They look at them and they've got to laugh, right? And so that way you're forcing people to let go, and not take anything too seriously. And that's when the magic happens, when people are in that state of creativity and they laugh a lot. Like I know working, having been a creative director a lot of my life, the best teams I work with just laugh a lot, and that's where the ideas come from. And it's the same in sport. When you get to international level, or probably even national level, if you have to consciously think, you're too slow. You actually have to trust yourself. And when you go to do it, you train and you have the imagery in your mind, and you have the images of you doing it close up, but you have the images of you observing yourself. And then when you go, you cannot consciously think. It's too slow. You have to just, what I would say, listen to the music and run the program and have trust in yourself. And so that's what happens with the groups. They just have a flow to them. And we know with the studies on executives, if they get in the flow, they're 5 times more effective. They can do in one day what takes them 5 days when they get in flow. And so it's getting them into that space, and then the magic happens.
I love that saying, Wayne. That's something I've used over the years, and the last part, and then the magic happens. And
Yeah, well, one of the, just on that point, one of the things that's really important, I've had lots of people come to me in groups, and say, how do you think this is going to go? Right? And I said, I don't know. And they said, what do you mean you don't know? Like, because everyone's thinking there's a result. And I said, no, I don't know. I said, if I did, it was no good. And they said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, if an accountant can come in and tell you what a group of people, how they're going to perform, which most of them can, you've been working in an organisation for a long time, they average out your performance level and what you do as a group. And they can tell you, if they add a new person to that, they're not too sure, but there's a mean, and then you're probably a little bit above it, a little bit below, but they can work that out. If they can do that, it's no good to me. It's a waste of time. When you've got magic happening and dynamics, anything can happen, right? And it can go anywhere. And you get up with really big ideas, and that's when the magic goes, is people let go, and you get just these amazing concepts that come up. And I've done it with defence, done it with federal government, done it with different government departments, and asked to lecture with defence. And defence are they're the big decision makers, right, all the time. It's critical that they get things right because people's lives are based on it. And that concept was implemented up to under the Vice Chief of Defence for their pre-preparedness intelligence branch decision making.
that's big.
Wayne,
That's pretty huge, Wayne.
Okay, Wayne, so my question is this: are you actually taking back to children's state these themes? Then they are able to tap into their ultimate potential to then come up with wonderful ideas and absolute new results. Is that what's happening here? It's basically unlearning their limiting ideas and patterns, and then use that subconscious part of their mind that's always been there, but somehow they were not able to use it. Is that what happens with your teams when you do those group exercises?
Yeah, so I'll address that first part of it, is that children are born quite creative, and that peaks at around about 5 years old. Then what we do is we take that away from them. One of the things with children is they have great imaginations and the ability to, imagination creates reality. And it's not possible to think of anything that is not possible. Okay, we can't think outside of existence itself, right? And children can do that. They just naturally have that flow. They naturally learn rapidly with teams. When they go to school, they're told that's cheating, which I find an absolute joke. When people work together in teams, that's cheats do that, and they naturally do that. And so going to Native American Indians, in the sense of the adults who have the children, they're still physically fit. They go off to work, and the grandparents who have all the wisdom have a sort of relationship with the children, and the most relationship is what the children teach them. So if I sort of try to put it into words, is that you've just come from where we used to be, and you understand what it is, how we should be. And so we'll learn from you how to have that spirit and imagination, live in the moment and live in play. And that's the most important thing we'll learn. And then we'll teach you how to survive in this dimension on this planet. And that's sort of the agreement they have between the two. So the children already have it. We take it away from them. So that's the fundamental major problem with that. And that's why I was talking about children, because there's the issue of prevention, which is one of the most important things. Like when I work in crisis disaster management, you want to prevent something happening in the first place. And then when it does happen, you want to be able to respond really quickly. But it takes a lot more effort to fix something that's broken, right? And so you need to work two things at the same time. How do we change the current system? But more importantly, how do we protect our children so they have sustainable well-being, with their health and their creativity and their imagination? And the school system's very much focused on having compliancy. And unfortunately, that doesn't cut it anymore. And so, as I spoke about, in history, all major civilizations, most of them fail after about 336 years. And so we're just doing it a lot faster now than what we've ever done. And it doesn't matter whether you do it in a micro model or a macro model. It's like cancer cells, right? You only have to have a few of them, and they can spread through the whole body and destroy the body. So if you get it right at a micro level, you can then scale it up really rapidly. And so, if you get a group of children and you teach them really well, like in societies that really thrive and have got, if you reverse the triangle around, what you find is the societies that basically have enlightenment and really leapfrog forward in time, the things that are really important to them is the arts and also philosophy. And the lowest level is economics. That's something that you have to live, to eat, and but that's very low level. And so what we've got is a triangle around the other way, where it's very much economic at the top, and at the bottom those things don't count very much. The sad part about it is that when you have societies that actually have the triangle inverted and they're more flat modeled, you have far greater economics, and you have far greater return on investment. If you just look at in the States, project I was working on, absentee levels, because people are sick, they don't like their work, they've got relationship problems, whether it's with marriage or something like that, and you have a consultant working in that organization who can work with those people and talk to them, the return on investment is for every dollar spent is about $1 to $6 return, because lost hours are really, really, and that's not even getting into creative capability, right? As I was saying, one genius is better than 1,000 mediocre people. And so if you get people thinking in that real creative space, the productivity goes up through the roof. And most people employ people to turn up to work. So, if you use the model like, okay, let's say you want to pay me $150,000 a year, what is your expectation of return on investment? Given that you've got administrative people that don't earn income in the buildings and all those other costs. And you'll find most organisations can't tell you what that is. But let's say they can. Let's say that, well, we expect you to bring in $5 million, and that would be an exceptional outcome. And so I say to them, well, if I work for you and I work for you for a month and I bring in 10 million, that means they're going to have the rest of the year off. Their first reaction is, no way in the world you can do that. I say, you're just paying me to turn up, right? Not for productivity. And you don't even know what the productivity is you want to have to achieve. And that's what you find with most organizations. So most people are task orientated. They'll talk about strategies, but in reality, they're not strategies at all. They're just tasks.
That's just so fascinating. Yeah, that could be a whole nother conversation on its own, right? Just there.
Yep.
Absolutely love this. Wayne, this is the 6-Star Business Podcast, and this conversation so far has just totally enthralled me, and I'm sure the audience listening. And Andrew, I can see him smiling and nodding the whole way, and he's excited, and I know he can't wait to talk to me about this afterwards. You've been talking about what it is to be a 6-star human,
yep,
community, society, business. What does 6-star mean to you?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it all starts with the people. That's really its basic thing, and people need to know themselves. If you take Art of War, if you know yourself really well and you know the situation really well, you're going to win. And that makes people very happy with themselves. So when you have an environment, I've been lucky enough to work in quite a few, and they've been top performing environments, one of them in the world, return on investment per person. So I know the environment. It's not that it's something I wouldn't be wishful thinking. I've actually worked in those environments in a couple of spaces, and also in one I created in one of my agencies as well. As and we'd won 26 international awards and fastest growing agency under 10 million and things like that. It works. And one of the top people in the industry said to me, "How do you do it? You're running your agency, you turn up at 9, you have lunch, you leave at 5, and then you skydive and do all this other stuff on weekends." And I said, "Having the right people." And they're all tasked to do their job. And so it all starts with the right people and then putting them in the right environment and getting them to ask the right questions. And there's a methodology to do that, which can blitz it. The thing is that you don't have to do the whole organization. Once you do that, you're then asking for trouble because the autoimmune system and the threats and the fear and all the other things come along with it. You actually select the people independently, bring in outside people, which also are selected for a task, so it's low-hanging fruit, ones that cause a lot of pain points and can be resolved quickly, and create proof of concept. And then people learn, and then you add to that. So you're not affecting the operations day to day. I'd liken it a bit like special forces in defence, right? They go off and do what they do, and defence do what they do. Right? They don't get in the way of each other. They work mutually. But as it goes on, more and more people go, "I want to be on the winning team. I want to be on the one where they're achieving great outcomes and they're having a good time and they're laughing a lot and they seem to be making fantastic progress." So you create a gravity rather than a push. Most organizations push things onto their customers and they push their people. Whereas if you create a gravity where people just want it, like say when Steve Jobs came up with the iPhone, he didn't have to push that really hard for people to go, "I want one of those," And so that's what you're trying to create, the ultimate environment where people thrive, and the right people together. Has that answered the question? Okay.
Yeah, boom, boom. That's brilliant. I'm conscious of the time. We are kind of at the end of the hour, and as much as I'd love to I want to keep talking, basically. I want to keep talking, but I'm respectful of our time. I want to ask you a closing question. Is there a piece of advice you can give our listeners, or just a little tidbit or a gold nugget for them to take away that they can chew on and learn from or take on?
Yeah, a couple of points. One, it's an internal journey, but the most important point is that you can't have a system and improve it with the same thinking. You have to have a dynamic change in the way you approach it if you want dynamic results. So most people are basically putting bandages on what I would consider a broken system. And if you're in sport, you learn a lot about teams and how to win, right? And and you're focused on the outcome and you're really clear on it, and you've got to have a good team that works together. And so the philosophy I sort of use with that is the way is no way. And what that means is you master all ways but be servant to none, because when you have a way of doing it, you have a weakness. And it's like, someone has a hammer, right? Everything looks like a nail. And so you end up becoming quite fluid or try to be agile like water all the time. And wind, where they go around obstacles really quickly and then form the container in which they're doing. But with wind, you can't see it, but you can feel it. So people can feel those things and feel good about it. And that all comes back to having really good situational awareness. Looking in the mirror, not having judgment, having neutrality, and clearly seeing what the situation is, not only internally, but also externally. And then that allows you to come up with the way.
That's really beautiful. Really beautiful. And it's all about nature too, what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Nature's critical. As I was saying, nature has all the lessons that we need to learn,
Yeah.
and biomimicry is a really big thing. Trees, for example, and plants have a greater language than what we have, more vocabulary. People just can't see it, and that's science, by the way. It's not
It's
soft.
not. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
not. It's not Wayne Larkin's theories of trees. No, I
no.
know.
And I've always been heavily involved and interested in unifying physics because that's the big one, right? How does everything work? And so when you look at lots of situations, doesn't matter whether it's in sport or business or whatever, the unifying theory helps you greatly on how you put things together and how everything works and create fractal systems that can scale up really, really rapidly. And we have a scientist, Nassim, at the moment that's classed as the leading one in unifying theories, qualified by tested out by CERN. Yeah. So it's not it's hard science. A lot of this it's not and practical. It works in sport and works in business. It's just that we've got caught into a groove, I guess, and it's hard to let it go. But it's
Yeah.
clear that it doesn't work for us.
And that's why you're here on this podcast. That's why I, met you and wanted you to come along and talk, because I knew that your journey, your understanding, your history is all about stepping out of that groove. And that means being six star. It means going outside of what is currently in front of us. And I just want to thank you for everything that you've shared today. I am so grateful. Endra, thank you for being my co-host. Is there any final thoughts or comments you want to share?
Wayne, absolute 6-star approach you have in yeah, in business, in life. We've been really enjoying this conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. That's it was really nice to be on the show, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Wayne.
All right, thank you.